watch thief, drug dealer. My son hasn't gone to Tenerife, been there 3 days and turned into Pablo Escobar.
Did you know the opening scenes of Wonder Woman 84 were filmed on the Tino Massif along the rugged coast of northern Tenerife, literally just up the road and down the hill from Masca? In fact, when 19-year-old Jay Slater took a wrong turn, that was where he was headed, towards a landscape fit for Amazons, not for a party animal from a small Lancashire town called Oswald-Twistle.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. Now remember, in the early days when they were talking about foul play, they were basically saying, you know what, when we get the autopsy results of this particular individual, Jay Slater, it's going to prove that there was foul play. And then the autopsy results came out.
His body was found in a steep and inaccessible area by a mountain rescue team almost a month later. But now an inquest into his death has concluded that the pattern of injuries were entirely consistent with a fall from a height.
And you may remember at the time people scoffing at this idea. What are you saying, that he fell? That he fell down and that is the reason for all of this drama? That is very odd. No one would just fall. No one would get lost in this day and age. And yes, at the time, the 29-day search was almost incomprehensible. It showed that it was possible for a person in this modern age to disappear off the face of the earth for an extended period. And as it turned out, Jay had simply headed in the wrong direction, left the path, and then fallen off the face of a ravine close to where his phone had pinged. Had the sniffer dogs been able to rock climb, no doubt they would have found him a lot sooner. This simple explanation struck virtually everyone covering the case as too simple, and even Jay's parents were soon convinced by social media that foul play was at work and that British investigators need to be called in because they were obviously superior to the fumbling, bumbling Spanish locals. It reminded me a lot of the Kylie Rodney case. You had this hysterical consensus that something much bigger was afoot, when it turned out in her case as well that she had simply turned, I think, to the right instead of to the left and had driven herself into Prosser Lake. Right now, with the shooting of Charlie Kirk, people are also demanding a much more dramatic cloak and dagger story than the one that law enforcement are providing them. And that is the legacy of all the shocking and dramatic and sensational movies and social media we get every day. When faced with a certain reality, we simply say, it's not really good enough, I need more. It needs to be more exciting, entertaining. There needs to be some twist in the tale. So are you noticing a pattern? Sensationalism soon overwhelms reason, exaggeration overwhelms common sense. It's happening in case after case after case after case. In terms of the Jay Slater case, Jay was found with blunt force trauma to his head and pelvis, consistent, as you heard a moment ago, with an accidental fall down a ravine. There were no bullet wounds, no knife wounds, no other bruises. His cell phone wasn't stolen. Nothing else was stolen. More than a year later, one of the most obvious aspects that I think almost everyone missed was that Jay set off the wrong way with virtually no sleep. So in a sense, I think you are on the right track when you say, you know what, someone just falling and getting lost just doesn't really make any sense in the pure light of day. But if you think about what is actually going on here, going back to the timeline, it actually does make sense. And the Times have compiled a simple timeline of Jay's movements that night. And the one thing missing is a block of time when he could have or should have slept. And a young person not getting enough sleep is very typical. And something going wrong when you haven't had enough sleep is very... Anyway, let's have a look at the timeline. 5:56 a.m., Jay takes a Snapchat video with a line of text saying he just took a 12K Rolly, short for Rolex, off a street seller and is going to sell it. What did his father say?
Watch thief, drug dealer. My son hasn't gone to Tenerife, been there 3 days and turned into Pablo Escobar.
Except it does look like he did steal a watch and he was trying to sell it. Ayub later tells the coroner the driver in the video was him but he knew nothing about the watch. The coroner rules it was not relevant. 6:09 a.m., Jay Snapchats his location on the way to Masca in the car. So 6 o'clock in the morning, they're actually on their way to Masca still. 7:21 a.m., it's about an hour and 10 minutes later, he posts another Snapchat from the Airbnb villa in Masca. Around this time, his friend Josh Forshaw, whom he met on the plane, says he received a Snapchat showing Jay had grabbed 2 knives from the villa and put them down his trousers in case it all kicks off. None of his friends note he was fearful, however. The coroner later decides the knives are likely to be Jay showing off, but it also seems like he's stealing knives from the villa. 8 a.m., Jay starts walking according to his smartwatch, but instead of turning right, he turns left up the mountain. He's seen by witnesses, including the owner of the villa. All of this was and is and has been a matter of fact from the very beginning, and yet you've had this consensus, including from the British media, that something else must have happened, some kind of foul play, when we've known all along that it took a wrong turn. But then what do? You simply disbelieve the witness. 8:21 a.m., Jay calls his friend Brandon, saying he's walking in the mountains. He then calls Bradley and tells him he's walking. Now, right now in the Tyler Robinson case, there's this complaint that, he's literally telling them the narrative via text. Well, that's exactly what Jay Slater is doing, and that is exactly what young people tend to do in a way that older people don't do as much. 8:32 a.m., Brandon wakes Lucy and tells her the situation. She calls Jay back and they have a 2-minute conversation. Jay tells her he needs water and is frightened. Now, is he frightened of someone else, or is he frightened of the situation he's in? Because he's lost. Lucy tells him he should go back the way he came, but Jay says he can't. After the call ends, she texts him to return to the Airbnb because it was boiling. 8:50 a.m. On a final call with Lucy lasting 22 seconds, Slater says his phone is on 1% and all he can see is mountains. He's lost. Shortly afterwards, his phone battery dies. Now again, if you're saying, I don't know how someone can get lost and disappear in this day and age, well, if you take away someone's phone and you're in a situation, you're in a country that you've never been in before, well, that makes it a lot easier, and also you're in the wilderness. The other aspect that's underreported is that Jay was high on drugs, which is why he couldn't sleep, why he couldn't settle down, and why he was wired and restless. And even though his father discounts this aspect, it's nevertheless part of the fabric of this case.
Watch thief, drug dealer. My son hasn't gone to Tenerife, been there 3 days and turned into Pablo Escobar.
Although Jay asked the owner of the Airbnb for directions, she told him a bus could take him where he wanted to go. Well, Jay either didn't listen or didn't understand or knew better. Possibly at 8 a.m. he simply felt he couldn't wait until 8 a.m. for the bus. That impatience, that impetuousness cost him his life. It was just one of a series of daft decisions he made that day, starting with going to Masca, which was miles away from his hotel and in the middle of nowhere. It just made no sense, as was appropriating someone's watch, as was getting shit-faced, as was failing to charge his phone, possibly running out of money and then deciding to walk back to his hotel with zero sleep. Had he known what he was doing, he would have arrived at his hotel 10 hours later at around 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. that night. Instead, it's very clear he didn't know what he was doing or where he was going. Now, of the dozens of cases I've covered and written books about, there are a small handful that I regret covering. Jay Slater is definitely one of them. I'll explain why in a moment. Let me first say that I actually traveled to Tenerife earlier this year and headed to the equally remote and treacherous town of Chamorro. It's in a very similar setting to Masca. It's also on the more rugged northern side of the island. It's actually very interesting just how the one side of the island, the southern side, which is where all the highways are and all the developments are, that is relatively not rugged, whereas the other side is extremely rugged. And so Chamorro is on the far east side instead of the west, which is where Masca is. And I also hiked to the coast, and I felt very strongly that my original intuition from behind the keyboard was right, that Jay was drawn, lured, whatever by a blue triangle winking at him just below the sea. And because he didn't have a map, he imagined that's where his hotel was. A shortcut on foot that would get him there in no time. And when I hiked, there was a piece where I lost track of the path. And I very quickly found myself in a very perilous situation. And I didn't want to turn around either. It's difficult to overstate just how rugged and treacherous and slippery and steep volcanic terrain actually is. And the rock underfoot is extremely uneven. But because Tenerife is an island, it's easy to underestimate. It's easy to think it's small and simple. And that's something I did as well. Who could imagine such a small island would have two enormous airports, 1 hour's drive apart? Now, right now, in terms of my coverage of the Tyler Robinson case, I'm being accused of just simply following the mainstream media narrative. Well, I didn't do that in terms of the Jay Slater case. I'm not doing that in terms of the Madeleine McCann case. I'm not doing that in terms of the John Monet Ramsey case. Or for that matter, the Amanda Knox case. I guess that statement is just made by people who don't know me or don't know this channel very well. I've got to say I was surprised by how arrogant the British were in this case, thinking themselves so superior to the Spanish. This seems to be a thing. We saw it in the McCann case almost 20 years ago, and it doesn't seem to have diminished. If anything, it's worse. Who found Jay in the end? Was it some all-bluster British expert? According to the Times, on the morning of July 15, 29 days after Jay went missing, the family were called to Playa de las Americas police station, where they met 2 detectives and a translator. They said human remains had been found and they believed it was Jay, Debbie says. I screamed. I think the police officer was holding my hand, but it didn't sink in at first. His body had been found above a dry stream bed beneath a 65-foot drop. His bag and driving license were found 65 feet above him, supporting the conclusion that he fell. I also thought the media coverage of this case from the British media was extremely biased and basically very poor. They pushed the foul play theory as far as they possibly could. Given their superior attitude, and I know this isn't true of all Brits, certainly there are some wonderful folks from Blighty, but you'd think the British audience would be a lot more clued up and clever. Yet I saw some of the silliest conspiracy theories I've ever seen spring up around this case, with the silliest of all being that Jay was still alive even after his body has been recovered. Right now in the Tyler Robinson case, there's also all this talk about, let's see the autopsy, and I can tell you once they do see the autopsy, everyone is going to forget about this whole thing about exit wounds. I don't really believe content creators are this brainless, but I do believe some will stoop so low just to milk the cash cow any way they can. And that makes the whole thing, this scam of pretending to care about one of their own while cynically making up stories to make money. It's just so seedy and distasteful and ugly. Jay was on a sort of hedonistic mission, while those looking on were trying to cynically monetize his death for all they're worth. Altogether, I have to say, it conjures a world and a society not worth caring about. I do think it goes without saying that my coverage of this case proved itself, that when a lot of people were saying one thing, well, my coverage has been consistent before the fact with the coroner's report and the final assessment of this case, including what the parents now believe actually happened. And I would say I was one in a minority. There were very, very few people who took the position I did, and I was right, wasn't I? The exact same thing repeated in the Kylie Rodney case. And mark my words, the exact same thing is going to repeat itself with the Charlie Kirk shooting. I don't think that's the point, though. I think the point is that society now wants to be entertained with conspiracy theories. And when I say I'm the most authentic voice in true crime, I think that's actually a turn-off for a lot of people. In a society with artificial intelligence and so much fake stuff that is circling, you'd think that people would see this as a precious, valuable commodity, someone who's telling the truth. And yet they simply don't. They just want to be mindlessly entertained. They want to, when they go on social media, they want to go to pleasure land. Like taking a drug, they simply want to be fed information that's going to feed their particular view of the world and what reality is. In fact, they probably don't want to know what reality is. Ironically, social media is playing this role of pretending that reality is something else, and that's very good for a lot of people. It's not very good for me. I don't think it's very good for society. And I mean, at the end of the day, isn't it a path to destruction?
What was the last message he sent? He said, listen, I'm not going to make it. It's kind of like, well, he knew he just weren't going to make it.
Anyway, I'm not going to take it further than that. I hope you enjoyed the footage that you've been seeing of Tenerife and the Canary Islands. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.